Hey everybody, Preston here. Hope the lighting is fine. I'm in my dorm. Tried to make this not look like a hostage video, so did my best. Um, my hypothetical church is very much hypothetical. It is sort of realistic more than it is idealistic. It's an Episcopal church in Atlanta. There's another full-time priest on staff who's older, very supportive, but about ready to leave. There's a part-time assistant, part-time youth worker, part-time children's ministry director. So a little bit of support. There's about 200 or 250 worshipers every Sunday and 400 people on the membership roll. The history of the church is that they really had their sort of heyday maybe 20, 25 years ago. This is pretty typical, especially of Episcopal churches, where they had 500 people on a Sunday, and most of them had declined a lot more, but this church has sort of been able to keep a decent number of folks around, mostly because of the priest's reputation in the city and a really good children's ministry. The church is technically on budget, but like basically every other Episcopal church in the country, it's a few bad decisions away from being in financial trouble. The church is made up of a lively group of people who like to be there on Sundays but don't really hang out with each other other than that, so there's some community building that could be done. The worship is fairly dry. This is, again, very much realistic. There's some tweaks of contemporary melodies and maybe some spontaneous prayer that has been recently added, and the people like that, but it is different from what they're used to. And the racial demographics of the church is about 50 to 60% white, about 20% African American, 10% Latinx, and some contingent of Asian American and Native Caribbean as well. It's pretty typical of like a big city Episcopal church this size, at least. The age demographics, mostly older folks, but there's a younger wave of new people who've been there for about 2 or 3 years. And the young people are loved by the older people, but they that might come under some tension later. That has to do with my problem. A little more background: the neighborhood that this hypothetical church is in is historically black, and is still primarily black, but is sort of in the pre-gentrification phase. You can sort of feel it coming. And most people in the neighborhood are primarily working class. Even the people moving in are sort of moving in because they are getting priced out of other parts of the city. Background for me in this context is that this church would have hired me about 1.5 years ago, so still new, but sort of get the rhythm of the place. And they hired me to eventually take over for the priest in a few years, but mostly to make new hires and to implement, to really like spearhead the implementation of a new mission, new values, and a new strategy. So that's going to be sort of the main problem that I'm trying to work out, and that's very broad, but this is something that I will probably be doing at some point, if not in the near future, then soon enough. Most Episcopal churches really struggle to have a sort of sense of identity. They just kind of lean on the fact that they're Episcopalian. And so I think I'll have to do this, and I'm going to particularly tackle what it would be like to do this when the conflict would be generational. So the people everybody has to sort of be on board at some level. So the problem really is generational conflict, but it's in the context of a new mission, values, and strategy statements. Some of the challenges that that might come up that I'm assuming in this problem is logistically, this type of church has no real outreach strategy. They just do events that they like. There's no real spiritual formation plans and no justice and mercy ministry per se. People just sort of call the priest. And interpersonally, the priest that I'm working with is great. They want me to guide the church in a new direction, but they're also understandably sort of sensitive about the things that they've done in the past. So that'll be one part of the generational gap that I'll work with. The vestry, which is sort of the leadership board of the church, they help in these sorts of decisions. It is a group decision, but it is more than most places. It comes down to whatever priest is in charge of making that choice. So I'll have a lot of influence here, but it'll be a challenge to sort of spread that influence out to get people on board. The vestry will be made up of 3 members of what I'll call the old guard. So these are people that have been there for more than 20 years, ages 55 to 75, and 3 members of the new guard, so ages like 25 to 45, and they've been there for at least 2 years. And then another added dimension that I'm not sure I'll be able to tackle. I probably will be able to tackle in the paper, but maybe not, is that the 3 largest giving units or families that give the most amount of money historically are 3 white families who have a lot of say because they've been there for so long, and maybe a little bit on the slow side to adopt new ideas. So I want to sort of play around with that tension too. Another interpersonal challenge is that I'm a white guy in a historically black neighborhood, but following a white priest, which I probably would be statistically, makes that a little bit easier. And so I'm going to, again, focus mostly on the intergenerational gaps and the sort of interpersonal and interpersonal struggles of putting together a new mission statement and strategy and values, which revamping the church, kind of all of the things that might come up and how to strategically plan for some of those. So here is what I want to do and how I hope to accomplish that with the class resources that we've had. So the mission statement answers the question, what do we do? So this may be like go and make disciples. Values is why we do it. This could be to follow Christ's commands or to love God in the world, or some sort of motivation. And then the strategy is how we do it. So that's sort of bread and butter. Your ministries fall under particular strategies. And this is like a conceptual thing that I'm wrestling through, and I'm not sure how to place this on a mind map. Is like I have my own thoughts already about what worship should look like, and all of these sort of, some of them are personal, but most of them I really think are not just sort of personal pet peeves, but they really would work in a context like this. And so I'll just state them out. The worship on Sunday, both historically for the Episcopal Church and here, Sunday is like symbolic of what the church is supposed to be all the time. And so some things that come up for me is that the sound would have to be increasingly multi-ethnic. So that is different beats, tunes, people singing, all sorts of things will have to sound different than just English choral music without leaving that behind. Thoughtful and understandable liturgy. So really thoughtful about the words people are being taught how to pray, but also make sure that it's not just jargon, that they really know what's going on. In a warm and direct sort of neighborly vibe, that it doesn't feel too stodgy, but is also serious. Next is that I would want to sort of intuitively see a sort of on the ground approach in the neighborhood. So that would require making some connections with neighborhood leadership, which I presume the former priest would really help with that. This can be like informal or formal leaders in the community. to really get a feel for what exactly is going on, what ways can the church actually help, in which ways would be just unhelpful, or we all know ways churches can screw that up without actually knowing what's going on. And lastly would be building a spiritual formation track, what some people would call discipleship. It is discipleship. It's just not normally called that in this tradition, and it probably should be. But that, I think, will be one of the easier things, actually. And the class resources that I'm hoping to pull from this in order to build the mission and the values and the strategy is in the Berkeley book in chapter 12, Robert Kemper talks about how to relate to a previous pastor, that it's in this context, and I think in most contexts, the priest is very highly thought of. They're not idolized, but they are given a lot of unilateral power. And so having the former priest be on my side for whatever ideas I might be trying to help with is a really big deal. Next is there's a few chapters that talk about how to clarify the language from the pulpit. That the pulpit is a sort of the primary way in which ideas in the church can sort of be formed. And I like the idea of trying to look through the resources we have to figure out what exactly are we talking about when we say that the worship needs to be engaging or something like that. And then chapter 16 in the Berkeley book, it's a Will Willimon section, and he says, quote, "Churches tend to overstate their inability to handle conflict. And I assume there will be a decent amount of intergenerational conflict here. I'm the opposite of what Willimon says churches are like. I have no problem with conflict at all. I'd like to think I don't jump into it, but I just am not afraid of it. And so I have to be very attentive to which conflict I need to actually pay attention to and which ones to just let lie." And then lastly, there's a lot in chapter 2 and really chapter 5 to 7 in the Malphurs reading on curating a team and how to get people ready for change. So I'm going to think primarily into that section. So that's it. If you made it this far, congratulations. God bless you real good. And I'll see y'all next week.